Despite the minor setback of Ifrit's attack, the goblin village continues to build and rebuild on schedule, while Rigurd and his goblin lords have worked out the finer details of governing even without Rimuru giving anyone orders. This works out for Rimuru as he's been experimenting with his new abilities he got from eating Ifrit and Shizu. For starters, Rimuru has repaired Shizue's anti-magic mask that got damaged during the incident with Ifrit. Rimuru also confirms his human form works exactly like a normal human body. His senses are slightly dulled when compared to using magic sense though. As a makeshift mirror, Rimuru spawns a clone and confirms his appearance in human form. Rimuru confirms that he looks a lot like an androgynous Shizue, doesn't have any gender, his default size is due to the limited mass of his physical body. Furthermore, the black mist he occasionally produces is his magical power making up for the difference in mass, and as needed he can alter his form to grow in age or switch between genders. Rimuru also confirms that his sense of taste has returned, and thus orders Rigurd to prepare a feast. On his way out of the village, Rimuru also confirms that a huge number of magical beasts are moving through the forest, possibly due to a change in the environment, so they'll have plenty of meat for the future. Rimuru takes the liberty of training the more dangerous of his abilities inside of the sealed cave where he figures he won't hurt anyone. Shizue's unique skill Degenerate allows her to fuse together and separate skills to produce new skills as needed. One of Shizue's stronger creations is Black Flame, a skill that produces a highly destructive mass of black plasma, thus is yet another skill that Rimuru has to be careful with. Rimuru also confirms the function of the anti-magic mask to suppress magical power, thus while wearing it, he appears to be a completely normal human. However, before he can experiment further, Rimuru receives an emergency request for aid from Ranga via thought communication. Ranga's hunting party has come under attack by a group of 6 ogres. Most of the members of the party have been put to sleep by the ogre's princess, and those who are still able to fight, Ranga, Rigger and Gopta, have only received minor injuries. Though Rimuru initially wants to settle the matter peacefully with the ogres, their leader will have none of it. By process of elimination, they have determined that Rimuru is the only one who could be responsible for the orc army that attacked their village. Their reason is based on account of the fact that he is in command of a group of monsters roughly as strong as the orcs. Rimuru commands Ranga to capture the ogre princess, while he focuses on dealing with the others. Rimuru incapacitates the hammer-wielding ogre using paralysis breath, the female warrior ogre by tying her up with sticky steel thread. He then deflects the other sword-wielding ogre with body armor and knocks him out with it while Ranga succeeds in capturing the priestess. The eldest among the ogres identifies each of the monsters the skill came from, and in the process confirming him as the most dangerous among the ogres. Rimuru attempts another attempt at peace and tries to deduce that who have mistaken him for, though the revelation of his abilities only serves to make them more suspicious. Unfortunately, the ogre elder takes the opportunity to sneak up on and try to kill Rimuru, though he only succeeds in cutting off one of his arms. Instead, Rimuru demonstrates his high-speed regeneration and immunity towards fire-based attacks. Deciding to take things seriously, Rimuru removes his mask and produces a giant mass of black flame and black lightning. The ogre princess, however, gets between them and reveals the misunderstanding, as she has determined that Rimuru is not the leader of the orc army that attacked them. Had that individual used this much power, they would have no need to use the orcs. She's also determined that the mask he is wearing is much different than the Margin who was leading the orc army, whereas Rimuru's mask seals his aura. The one the Margin was wearing didn't. Now that the ogres have calmed down, Rimuru reabsorbs his attack and reveals his true slime nature before leading both groups back to the village to determine who is responsible for the army of violent thugs that attacked the ogres' village, confirming that none of the ogres have names in the process. A crowd of tense hobgoblins have gathered around Rimuru, who is taste testing meat skewers that have been prepared for him. After careful consideration, Rimuru cheerfully declares the meat good, and is quite happy to have his sense of taste back. While the various hobgoblins, dwarves and ogres are enjoying themselves, the ogre's young master has sat down with Rigurd, Rimuru and Kaijin as he explains what happened. Several days ago, an army of fully armoured and armed orcs attacked the ogre's village without provocation or warning. Though the 300 ogres lying in that village were quite strong, the sheer numbers of the enemy soldiers attacking them overwhelmed them. The ogres are all that's left. One of the last things that the young master saw before fleeing with as many people as he could was a Margin wearing a clown's mask standing over his father's burning corpse. Since Rimuru's mask looked similar, they concluded that they must have been working together, hence their misunderstanding. The most sensible conclusion is that the orcs have been given new power by a demon lord. Why, they don't know. Rimuru takes the liberty of noting that the ogres have settled into the village rather nicely, which leads him to wonder what the ogres plan on doing now. Naturally, the young master's current greatest ambition is to find the leader of the orcs and kill him, along with as many of his subordinates as possible. Realizing that the young master doesn't have a plan at all, Rimuru instead proposes that they become his subordinates in the mutual interest of fending off the army of orcs that are wandering around the forest, destroying everything in sight. It is something that the ogres need to consider carefully, so the young master goes out to think. The next morning, the ogres find their resolve and agree to become Rimuru's subordinates, at least until they can hunt down and defeat the orcs' leader. As is customary with his subordinates, Rimuru names each one of the ogres. The young master is now Benimaru, his younger sister Shuna, the female ogre is Shion, the elderly ogre Hakuro, the other male is Soe, and finally the hammer-wielding ogre is Kurobe. Once the process is done, however, Rimuru passes out from overusing his magic again and wakes up days later to learn the ogres have evolved into Kijin and have since been keeping themselves busy inside the village. Hakuro has taken to bullying groups of hobgoblins and calls it training them. Kurobe has inserted himself into Kaijin's blacksmith team, while Shuna and Shion have been taking turns looking after Rimuru's unconscious body. The reason why naming 6 ogres took up so much of Rimuru's magic is because naming stronger monsters takes up vastly more magical power than the weak goblins. Benimaru and Rimuru begin discussing strategy in dealing with their enemy. After having time to think about it, Benimaru wonders if the orcs are connected to another demon known as Gelmud, who visited their village offering to name the ogres, claiming to be a lieutenant in the demon lord's army. Rimuru recognizes the name Gelmud as the one who also named Rigor, and wonders if it's a coincidence. In the meantime, the orc army is making its way to the Lizardman village near Lake Siz. After determining the enemy outnumbers them 2-1 and that they've already crushed the stronger ogres, the Lizardman chieftain concludes that the enemy army is being led by a legendary monster known as an orc lord, who is said to devour the fear and hesitation of his subordinates, making him a natural leader. Thus the chieftain calls his son Gabiru and assigns him the task of forming an alliance with the goblins in the interest of boosting their numbers. Unfortunately, while travelling to the goblin village and over lizards, Gabiru's subordinates boast they already are overconfident Gabiru by commenting that with the name given to him by a demon lord's lieutenant, Gelmud, it's only fitting that he uses this crisis as an opportunity to succeed his father as chieftain. The Kijin are hard at work in Rimuru's village. Shuna is showing the dwarfs and goblins her methods for weaving hellmoth silk, while Shion has inserted herself as Rimuru's personal bodyguard and secretary. She also attempts to become his chef too, but after Gobta gets food poisoning from her food, Rimuru assigns Benimaru the role of her taste tester, on account that he and the other Kijin already knew she was a horrible chef. Meanwhile, Gabiru and his fellow lizardmen are progressing in their efforts to bring the goblin villages under their command. They note that the next one they are to visit has tamed direwolves under their command, his subordinates once again padding Gabiru's ego. The group travels to Rimuru's village, and after making an ostentatious entrance for Gabiru, the lizard man ends up insulting Rimuru to his face in front of his subordinates, trying to recruit Ranga's pack to fight the orcs. Diffusing the situation, Ranga has Gob to fight Gabiru instead, with Rimuru motivating him with the carrot stick combo of a weapon from Kurobe and more of Shion's cooking. The hobgoblin uses the spear he was given as a distraction, shadow motion to sneak up on Gabiru, and finally he knocks him out with a kick to the back of his head, causing his subordinates to take their leader and flee. In spite of Gabiru's personality and him seeming too stupid to be a scared attitude, making an alliance with the lizardmen isn't a bad idea. The orcs are in their territory, and dealing with them there is preferable than waiting for them to strike. Rimuru also wonders that if the demon lord that is backing them is the same one who hurt Shizu, but while in a meeting with his subordinates, a dryad named Trenyid asks to join in, requesting that Rimuru subjugate the orc lord. The meeting between Rimuru and his subordinates and Trenyi the dryad continues. Soe reports that he scouted the destroyed ogre village and has confirmed that both the ogre corpses and the orc corpses have completely disappeared. According to Trenyi, the surviving orcs ate them. When an orc evolves into an orc lord, they gain an ability called Starved, which works similarly but differently than Rimuru's predator. As if further prodding Rimuru to action, Trenyi also informs him that the orc's actions are being guided by a Margin named Gelmud, who is working for a demon lord. Remembering the promise made to Shizu, Rimuru agrees to wipe the Orc Lord. As a start, in order to even the numbers against the 200,000 strong orcs, Soe is assigned to establish proper diplomatic relations with the Lizardmen chieftain. In the meantime, Gabiru finally wakes up following his humiliating defeat by Gobta. He immediately comes to the conclusion that Gobta was the strongest fighter in the village and that they lied to him about being weak to throw him off. One of Gelmud's colleagues, Laplace, informs him about the impending attack on the Lizardman settlement and voices his concerns that Gabiru's father might be too weak to face them. Thus, Gabiru makes a decision to take over the tribe now and lead his people to victory against the orcs. Meanwhile, Soe arrives at the Lizardman village where he forces his way into the chief's chambers. With the orc army on their doorstep, Soe instructs the chief to hunker down in a defensive battle until Rimuru's reinforcements arrive to deal with the orcs. After rescuing one of his guards from being decapitated by Soe, after he insults Rimuru, the chief makes a few deductions. Soe, originally an ogre and now a Kijin, after being named by Rimuru, is being of great power. Rimuru therefore must be someone of even greater power to be the one who named him. If such a person was such... 4 days later, midway through Rimuru's reinforcements arriving, Gabiru arrives and overthrows his father as chief military leader, waging several guerrilla battles against the orcs. However, he is caught off guard by the terror of an army that devours its own dead. As Rimuru Tempest and his kaijin stare down the Orc Lord and his subordinates, they are suddenly interrupted by the appearance of Gelmud. The Margin accuses Rimuru and his group of ruining his plans of creating a puppet demon lord. When Rimuru realizes Gelmud was the one who named Rigur the First, Gabiru admits the Margin named him too. In response to Gabiru's speaking, Gelmud incapacitates him and his subordinates and orders them to be obediently eaten by the Orc Lord while he rants about how he went through all the trouble of raising up a bunch of strong monsters and creating an Orc Lord, which leads the Kijin to the realization that Gelmud was the one who ordered the attack on their village. The Orc Lord, on the other hand, seems confused by Gelmud's orders, and the Margin admits that he is working for someone else when he rants that he's trying to place the forest under the Orc's control. As Gelmud is about to finish off Gabiru and his subordinates, Rimuru steps in to protect them before giving Gabiru health potions to heal his subordinates. Angered with Gelmud's actions, Rimuru hogties him and begins to beat down on him until he's backed into the Orc Lord. The Margin demands that the Orc help him. However, it becomes apparent that even the Orc Lord has grown tired of the Margin's voice, as he decapitates and eats Gelmud, which triggers his evolution into an Orc disaster. Rimuru decides then and there that if he doesn't put down this newly bored demon lord, then it will really turn into a disaster. The Kijin along with Ranga let off the first volley of attacks. Shion and Hakuro, working together, managed to chop the orc's head off. Unfortunately, the demonic features he acquired from Gelmud allows him to simply reattach his head. Soe and Benimaru decide to follow up by trapping the orc disaster in a steel thread cocoon and blast him with hell flare, followed up with Ranga hitting him with black lightning. The orc disaster not only survives the attacks, but also eats one of his subordinates to recover, which puts them at square one. In order to defeat the Orc Lord, Rimuru deploys his trump card, ordering Great Sage to take control of his body and use it and all of his abilities to their full potential to defeat the Orc Lord. Great Sage dodges the Orc disaster's attacks and chops his arm off using a black flame-cloaked sword, preventing the wound from regenerating thanks to the lingering flame before destroying the Orc's weapon. In response to these developments, the Orc disaster rips off his still-burning stump and fires off Gelmud's magic at Rimuru. Great Sage predates the Orc disaster's magic before the Orc disaster closes the distance and grabs Rimuru. While still under Great Sage's control, Rimuru fires off his flare circle ability that he gained from eating Ifrit. But much to the dismay of Great Sage, the Orc disaster has now gained fire resistance, meaning the attack has no effect. Rimuru doesn't seem too shocked by this revelation, as it seems that fire resistance is a common skill among high-ranking monsters. Great Sage attempts to conceive a new attack plan, but is cut short by Rimuru, who retakes control of his body, and, seeing as how the Orc Lord is trying to eat him, engages in a clash of skill against the Orc, countering his staff with his own predator. Accidentally entering the Orc's memories, Rimuru witnesses the dread of the Orc disaster. The Orc's lands are dry and barren, they can't get any food and they are starving to death. The Orc King has resorted to tearing off his own flesh just so that he can feed his people's children, while he laments that their offspring are dying one by one. He informs his adjutant that he intends to look for food in the Great Jura Forest, but on his way collapses. Enter Gelmud, who offers the Orc King food and a name, Geld. Geld the Orc Disaster explains that he knew all along that Gelmud had no good intentions for his people, but for him, Gelmud's scheme was a ray of hope in their darkest hour. The Orc Disaster knows that without someone to lead them, his people are doomed, so he fully intends to eat Rimuru. Rimuru, however, counters that he will eat Geld, all of him, his sins and those of his people. Saying that, the broken mind of the Orc Disaster returns to being whole, as Rimuru changes the barren landscape of his home into the lush forest of Jura. Before Geld disappears into Rimuru's stockpile of souls, he thanks the greedy slime. In the real world, the Orc Disaster has been eaten by Rimuru, who simply asks that Geld rest in peace. Without their leader or the effects of starving ones, the orcs have been stopped. As per their deal, the Kaijin are free to go if they so choose, though they instead request to stay and pledge their loyalty to Rimuru. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to let us know by leaving a like. Subscribe for more stories and check out other stories here.